Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar entitled Optimizing Internal Communications, Lessons Learned from 80 High-Performing Intranets. My name is Kelly, and our main presenter today is ThoughtFarmer President Darren Gibbons. Darren is passionate about data and enjoys crunching numbers, so the process of analyzing so much customer data for this presentation has probably been one of Darren's highlights this year. Some of the analysis presented today will get pretty deep, but we promise to also provide some high-level takeaways that will help you improve your own internal communication strategy. And also, Darren and I are both working from home, so you might hear some barking dogs or some screaming kids. But yeah, this presentation should be about 30 minutes long, and then we will have some Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type it in the question section in the GoToWebinar panel. Over to you, Darren.
Thanks, Kelly. As Kelly mentioned, this is going to be a data-heavy presentation. Our main focus here is going to be on internal communications, but there's also going to be quite a bit of Excel and formulas. So I hope you had your coffee and are ready to dig into some numbers. I'm going to be summarizing some key findings based on the data here, and I'm going to provide you with some takeaways that you can use to improve your intranet. Before I get started, I just wanted to provide a high-level overview of ThoughtFarmer so you can understand where the data came from. Now, ThoughtFarmer was founded on one simple principle: to make work better. We want ThoughtFarmer to help you make your work better, but also make your work a better place to be. ThoughtFarmer is modern intranet software. It brings employees together no matter where they are, keeping them productive, informed, and engaged. It's a standalone intranet software. You can run it on your own servers, or you can use our secure cloud environment. It features integrations to critical business software such as Slack, Office 365, and G Suite. It's the central hub where your whole workforce, whether they are remote or in the office, can be kept connected, informed, and productive. We solve key business problems through a user-friendly and intuitive user experience. It's backed by amazing professional services that get you up and running quickly, and a fantastic customer success team that'll support you in keeping your intranet successful. So that's a brief overview of the product. If you'd like to know more, please visit our website or reach out to us after the presentation. Now, today's presentation is going to be focused on internal communications. Now, before we talk about that, I think it's useful to share a definition. So this is how we view internal communications. Internal communications aligns employees to company strategy by informing and engaging staff via the most relevant channels. Now, the data that I'm going to share is really going to focus on the last half of this statement, specifically around which content is informing and engaging your employees. Now, when we talk about channels, I'd like to understand which channels that you are all using. So this is a little we're going to try some interactivity here. Kelly's going to run a quick survey here.
Okay, I will launch the poll here. And if we can just have everyone take a few seconds and respond to it. This is fun. I'm watching this live. The numbers populate. And maybe just give a few more seconds. Okay, and I'm going to close this poll, and I should be able to share that with everybody.
All right, there's the results. So the majority of you are using intranets today, which is fantastic. If you don't have an intranet, please contact us afterwards. We'd love to get you hooked up with ThoughtFarmer. So you can see here the top number one is intranet, but also email. Newsletter is also very popular here. video web conferencing, chat messaging, and survey tools kind of rounding out the bunch there. So when it comes to internal communications, there's a lot of different channels that you can use. The channel that we're going to focus on for today's presentation is going to be about intranets. And when we talk about how we do communication on intranets, the majority of that is going to be done through news posts and blogs. And if you've ever written or published news or blog posts on your intranet, you've probably had some questions. Questions like, what posts do staff actually view? What posts are people interacting with? How do I make sense of the data? What are other organizations doing, and how do we compare? What can I measure, and what can I learn? So for the rest of this presentation here, I want to really try to dive into some of these questions, and using the data that we have,
Darren,
because we're going to...
sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you. I think we're still showing the poll. So
okay.
I'm just going to, yeah, there we go. Sorry.
Okay.
Continue.
All right. So these are the questions that people are going to be asking once you start posting news and content on your intranet there. So I'm going to dig into some of the data that we've got access to be able to hopefully answer some of these questions across a range of different organizations, and hopefully give you some ideas on how you can also measure this type of information on your own intranet. So let's talk about the data here. So what we did is we took 80 different corporate intranets, and these are intranets that we have access to their data in a aggregate and anonymized fashion. So we're only looking at the high-level statistics of data that are coming from these intranets here. We looked at these intranets, and we pulled out 15,903 news and blog posts that were published in 2019. So you can see there's just a screenshot there of the data. All the analysis here that we've done has just been done with Excel. So for each post, we looked at things like the number of views, the number of unique views, the number of likes, the number of comments, and the number of likes that the comments got. And for the first two items there, just to be clear, so a view is the raw view count of a post. So if somebody comes and views every time they view a news item, that's going to count as a single view. If they view it 5 times, it's going to count as 5 views. Now the unique views, that's the count of the number of employees that have seen that post. So if you've got 50 employees in your organization and 40 of them come and view that post, no matter how many times they view it, that unique view is still going to be 40. Now, if we go and we graph the number of posts across each of these 80 different intranets, we see this long tail distribution, which is very common in statistics. And this is also kind of known as like the 80-20 rule. And what it's saying here is that probably the 80% of posts are coming from the top 20% of intranets. And so you can see here in this graph, each bar represents an intranet, a company, and you can see the count of the posts there. So you've got a couple at the top here with very high number of posts, and they just kind of trail off into the distance there as those post counts drop. So this is some interesting data here. We can do some counts. We can look at some information here on those posts. But if we really want to try to get some more meaning, we need to go and we need to categorize that content. So what I did was I went through, and this is a manual process, I went through each post and I categorized them into a broad range of different topics. And yes, I manually went through all 15,903 posts and did this categorization. So when we look at the categories, you'll see here now, if we're just looking at that volume here, we can break this information down further and see what are the top 10 categories by volume. The first one here is just this broad category of company news. This is going to be news announcements. It's going to go to everybody inside the organization. It's going to be very broad. It's going to be not specific to a specific team or a specific department or location. It's shared across the entire organization. Rounding out the top 5 here, you see the department news, which is similar to company news, but is really scoped to a specific department. Employee news, which is going to be HR related. Meeting minutes, very high in the terms of the volume, and then sales wins, rounding out the top 5 here. So this kind of gives you a perspective here in terms of how people are using news and blog posts across their intranets. That company news, I'm going to come back to it because I see it as kind of the baseline for interaction for posts there, because it is kind of the lifeblood and one of the core functions of an intranet. Now, if we now say, let's take a look and see what are the top 10 categories by number of views. So which content is getting the most views? Not surprisingly, that company news is also number one. You see a little bit of change here in the ordering on the rest of them here. Department news is quite popular, same with employee news, but you'll see there that fun news, and I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that later, it is now in the top 5 here. Meeting minutes also continuing to be getting a lot of views on intranets. Now, a couple of things here, just some caveats just to keep into mind here. It doesn't take into account security permissions. So obviously some content, like things like department news, but also things like meeting minutes and what have you, those are going to be types of content which oftentimes may have security restrictions placed on it here. My analysis doesn't take into account any types of security restrictions on content. So if content is restricted to smaller groups, then it is just going to get fewer views. And so as such, will be affected by this. Something I also want to recognize here as well too is we went those 80 intranets that we surveyed there is a broad range of company sizes, from hundreds of employees up to thousands of employees. Now, if we're just doing raw counts here in terms of views, these top 10 categories are going to be skewed by the very large organizations. So if we want to understand content, we need a better metric than just views. And so this is where we started creating some new metrics here. And the first one I'm going to talk about here is reach. And so the reach, I define it as the percentage of staff that have viewed a post. And it's created by dividing the number of unique views, so the number of times a post has been viewed, divided by the total number of employees. So if we take a look at this here, we can say now, this percentage, this reach percentage, we can get an understanding of how far this content is reaching across people inside your organization. So now let's take a look again. So before I shared the top 10 categories by views, now let's take a look at by reach. So this is going to level out, small and large organizations, and it's also going to give us a view into the types of content that really are getting a broad access to. The number one here at the top is CEO posts. We'll talk a little bit more about these categories later. Number two is strategy or strategic related content. Number three is conference related content. Number four is fun news, and number five is project news. So we really start to see some more kind of interesting patterns start to emerge when we use this metric of reach, which is the type of content that is getting across to your employees in the best way. The next synthetic metric here that I want to talk about here is engagement. So reach really kind of talks about who's viewed this content. But with social intranets, there's more that you can do than just view content. You can also engage with it. You can like it, you can add comments, you can like comments. And what we want to get an understanding of here is what is the type of content that is most engaging for the audience? What are the blog posts that people are finding interesting, that they're commenting on, that they're really coming back to and having discussions around, any type of engagement here. Now, so this formula here, what we're trying to do is do something similar where we're trying to understand, put together a score for how engaging that piece of content is. And when we talk about engagement, it's important to recognize there's varying levels of interaction that a person can have with a piece of content. The most basic element is just to view it. The next item up on this kind of ladder of engagement would be to like that content using the like button. The next level up would be to like a comment that's posted on the page. And then the highest level of engagement would be adding comments into it. And so what we did with this engagement score is we kind of weighted the number of the total views, the number of the likes, the number of comments liked, and the number of comments, so that there's a weighting factor that's involved there in that engagement score. And then we also want to take it, we also want to multiply it by reach, because that's going to give us that leveling effect, to give us the ability to see how this engagement score is leveled across organizations, regardless of their company size. So now, let's take a look at what those top 10 categories are by post engagement. And so again, what's interesting here is you see some common patterns, but you also see some new items that are coming up to the top that are very engaging for employees. Payroll and benefits, the #1 spot. #2, again, CEO posts, very popular. 3, fun news, very engaging. Strategy and employee news kind of rounding out the top 5. So at this point here in my presentation, I've now completed all my number crunching, but this gives us a bit of a foundation to kind of talk about this data and some of the observations that we've been able to glean from it. So I'm going to switch here now, and I'm going to share with you 8 different observations. I'm going to dive into some of those categories and talk a little bit more about them. The first observation is just around payroll and benefits. Payroll and benefits is going to be news posts that are related to payroll. It's going to be related to bonuses, benefits, and perks. And not surprisingly, it has a very, very high engagement level. If we compare it to the company news, this is like the broad kind of general purpose news that's shared across the company, it has almost 10 times the engagement. So people are very interested in anything that's going to be related to payroll. If you look at the top 10 posts by engagement, just the actual posts themselves, 6 of the top 10 are related to benefits and compensation. And it's the #1 category by engagement is that payroll and benefits content. So people really want to see that, that information there. One of our very first customers that we worked with was IDEO, and they really did a great job of taking this information and making it live on their intranet. One of the first things they did when they launched their intranet was they actually published all of their payroll and benefits information. Their new pay schedules were there on the intranet. And if you wanted that information, you had to go to the intranet there. This is a graph that just shows some of the engagement that they saw. This is a graph showing content creation over time. And in the bottom left-hand corner there, you see the intranet just had this huge jump up right at launch. And it was because they brought in pretty much all their staff. Their intranet was their main gateway into that payroll information. And so it was a great way to bring that audience in. And from there, they got hooked and came back again and again. So our recommendation here is you want to try to link up that payroll system, any types of policy information, and tie it here into your intranet. And the second observation that we had, CEO blog posts, they perform really well. So they're going to reach 70% more staff than regular company news, and they have over 3 times as much engagement as regular company news. So if you have that type of, if your CEO is interested in sharing that information, I strongly encourage them to share that on their intranet. Similarly, a lot of the stuff that CEOs are going to be sharing is going to be strategic related, but also strategy related news. Where is the company going? We talked about internal comms. We talked about the importance of sharing that company strategy out to staff. That's a key role for intranets. And strategy news, they have a 70% higher reach than company news. So they are getting out there and they are reaching your audience. They're going to cover things such as quarterly or annual goals, strategic planning. People are really interested in seeing this. An example of this is with our customer ACCA. They're the Association of Chartered Accountants in the UK. And one of their key areas of their intranet is their CEO, and they actually use video for this. So that's their CEO there. She provides a monthly briefing on key topics and sees very high engagement with that. So our recommendation here, build out a CEO corner and communicate your annual and quarterly strategies on the intranet. Next up here, next observation, fun matters. Fun news, we're talking about things like employee contests or recipe blogs, travel blogs, pet blogs. It has the 3rd highest engagement of any category. And people really, some organizations, their culture is not really amenable to sharing this kind of things, but if it is, we strongly recommend this. It's a great way to kind of share culture inside your organization and bring people together. Fun matters here. These topics, they reach 20% more staff than regular company news, and they have a 70% higher engagement than regular company news there as well too. This is a good example here. This is just one of our customers, Destination Canada. They're a tourism company. They encourage tourism into Canada. And one of the things they do here is on an annual basis, when they have their KPIs they publish for the year, they run a contest and they actually ask people to guess what the numbers are going to be. This is part of their blog post here. You can see this is like the Oscars here where they announce the winners. They have a prize for them. They talk about who won the contest here. It's just kind of a fun thing to do inside your organization, and it's a great way to drive engagement. So our recommendation here is, bring the fun. Intranets don't have to be boring. This fun content helps communicate culture, it engages employees, it improves adoption. And especially for many organizations these days are either working, they're fully remote right now, or they're in a hybrid with a mix of people in the office and working from home. The internet can really act as that central hub, that water cooler, to bring people together and to engage with them and make them feel like they're part of something bigger than just a job. Number 4 is employee news. So employee news is new hire announcements, promotion, it's recognition, it's kudos, and it has the second highest engagement of any category. If we look at the numbers for it, you'll see that the employee news, even though it reaches 15% fewer employees compared to company news, it has a 10% higher engagement than company news. And I think the reason why oftentimes employee news does have a smaller reach than company news is because it's oftentimes department specific. It's not being shared out to the entire corporation, but these announcements are happening inside, within a department. And I think that that's a great way for employee news to be used. We use this on our own intranet. This is just an announcement of a new hire here, gives you some background, some perspective, helps you understand her interests, shares some fun content here, like a picture of her with a sloth, and lots of opportunities for people to comment and to say welcome and to help to make that person feel like they are part of the organization. So our recommendation here, employee news such as hires and key accomplishments, it should really be part of your HR process. Observation number 5 is meeting minutes. And meeting minutes are the 4th most common category. Now, generally speaking, they don't have a high reach or engagement, but they do provide a good use case for intranets. So we use these quite heavily. So this is an example here of our weekly customer success team meeting. So basically every single team meeting, there's a meeting minutes page here. It includes to-do items or actions or next steps. It captures information, key issues, and helps keep everybody on the same page. And again, when you're working remote, having this spot here, a centralized source for this type of content, is really useful. So even though the reach and engagement will be low, because really that content is only going to be specific to those smaller teams, it has a lot of benefit there. A great tip here is to create a meeting minute template, and then prior to each meeting, just clone it and have all those the predefined sections in there, whether you're the action items or the follow-up from previous items. Alternatively, you could just take your meeting minutes from the previous meeting, clone that, and modify for this week. Now, I've talked a lot about what works. I want to talk a little bit more about some of the observations we had that maybe didn't work as well. The first one here, I want to talk about newsletters on the intranet. And I want to be clear here, I'm not talking about newsletters that are delivered via email, which I think are a great way for internal communications. I think we saw that earlier, that a third of you are using email or newsletter management. And those are great tools for pushing out information to your staff via email. What we did notice though is some customers, what they're doing is taking those same newsletters and putting them on the intranet. And what we saw was that generally speaking, those newsletters have 70% less reach than company news, and they have 29% less engagement than company news. So if you're building those newsletters, continue to send them out via email, but make sure you're linking that content back to the news posts that are on your intranet. Don't just archive those newsletters there. Here's an example of one of our customers that creates these custom newsletters. This is MedData. They do a great job with these newsletters. Super interesting, fun to look at. But you'll notice there they all drive those links all drive content back to their intranet. The next observation of things to watch out for here is headlines. Don't use boring headlines. So some examples of some headlines here that we saw of high engagement. If we looked at the high engagement blog posts, generally speaking, they all had really interesting and compelling headlines that invited me to click on those and find out, what's going on here. So examples would be, watch the March all hands meeting, you asked, we answered, online pay stubs now available, organization changes from the desk of the CEO. Stuff that we saw that had low engagement, reminder, Friday is fridge clean day, October perks, CEO update March 15th. For those newsletters that I mentioned there earlier, a lot of them had just these headlines that were just like HR newsletter June 16th, right? This is not going to be really compelling content for people to click on. Aim for having great, compelling headlines. A fun fact that I noticed as I was just going through the data here, if I pulled out all the posts that had an exclamation mark in the subject line and compared them to those that did not, they had a 50% higher engagement for posts. So if you have one takeaway from my talk here, just add exclamation marks everywhere. I'm kidding. I don't think you should really do that. But so yeah, combining these two observations together here, newsletters, they work best for channels like email. The newsletter format on the intranet is just not going to be as compelling. So break up that content into separate posts with relevant and attention-grabbing titles. And my last observation here is that more content drives more engagement. So if we look across these intranets here and see, okay, the ones that are having the most engagement, engagement with the posts, what types of things are they doing well? And really what we saw there was they're publishing a lot of content. And this follows whether or not they're large or smaller organizations. The organizations that are publishing and sharing a lot of content on their intranet are seeing a lot higher, 70% higher engagement. So in summary, things that you should do, put your payroll and benefits information on your intranet, get your CEO blogging or video blogging. Strategic news are key opportunities. Bring the fun, have some of those fun posts on there. Share employee news and employee wins. Post your meeting minutes onto the intranet and use templates. Things to watch out for. Engaging titles make for engaged audience. Newsletters work best in email, not just on the intranet. And finally, have a content plan in place. Don't just launch your intranet and expect that content to materialize. The next thing here too is just don't be afraid to look at the data. So ThoughtFarmer provides some great usage analytics and reporting tools. And you can take that content, you can export it from those analytics and reporting tools and import it into there's some great analysis tools out there. I'm thinking of things like Tableau and Power BI, but they're not required. Everything that I did in this presentation here, I did with Excel, just by using sums and some formulas and maybe a pivot table here and there. It's got everything you need to do this type of analysis and really have fun with it. I find it quite enjoyable to get into that data and to start to tease some findings out of it. It was an interesting process putting together this presentation here. So, and lastly, I just want to talk next here about something that's coming soon. This is a new feature that we're adding to ThoughtFarmer, our next release. So this will be coming in version 9.9, which is coming out in the next month. It's a new content audit report. And what it does is it allows you to export an Excel report that contains information. And you can run it across your entire intranet, or you can run it on just one specific section. It's available to site administrators, but it's also available optionally to power users as well. So if there's a group of content administrators or content owners inside your organization that you want them to be able to run this report across the sections that they manage. They can go in there, they can enter in a date range or just export everything and pull that content out of there, and they'll get the same kind of metrics that we shared about, that I've been talking about here, and they can do further analysis on that. So what kind of things can you do with this report? You can analyze that content for reach and for engagement. You can find stale content. You can identify areas of your intranet that need reorganization. You could review the content ownership and the security configuration, and generate additional reports and metrics based on the data that's in that report, so further analysis. So yeah, it's a great new feature. It's coming soon. We're going to jump here now into, but that's the end of my presentation, so I'm going to jump here now into Q&A. So if you want to fire off any questions here, feel free to use that, that questions panel over there, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Darren. That was excellent. Yeah, there are a few questions that have come in. There was one question early on from Ray, and he was asking, were those the number of posts per year? So I'm not sure whether that was some early graph that you were showing in the presentation.
I'm guessing that was probably the timeline graph that the graph of posts that I shared very early on, and the number of posts per intranet, and what this post here. This is actually, so I looked at data. I ran it. The report ran for January 1st to December 31st of 2019. I wanted to choose a period in the past there, just otherwise, so we could have a set of posts that we're going to be all kind of even in terms of their lifespan, in terms of how many comments or how much time they've had for people to view them. So this is the total number of posts by organization. So each one of these columns here represents a company, and that's the total number of posts for that company for that time period. Hopefully I answered that question.
Thank you. Donna is asking, do you have a metric on what percentage of employees view homepage content?
Yes, that is, this report will actually, I mean, for what it's worth, this report will actually, you can run it directly off the homepage there, and it would tell you the views onto the homepage. But we do also have our other analytics tools provide this content, that information there as well too.
Okay, Lori is asking, how do you develop a content plan?
That's a great question. One of the things that we've seen organizations do, the whole kind of content planning tools is a great opportunity actually to reach out to your marketing department, because that's something that for many organizations, that outward-facing content calendar is a key part of their marketing strategy. I know it is for ours. So if you look at our blog, we have a ton of really great blog posts and content on there. And we work through a schedule for a calendar where we plan out what our blog posts will be there in the future. Internally, I mean, we use ThoughtFarmer for this, in terms of we use the ThoughtFarmer calendar in terms of tracking what those content items are, and where we want to be publishing them, or when we want to be publishing them and by when. But there's a lot of great tools out there as well for managing that kind of editorial calendar for your organization for public-facing use, and I think you can take that same approach and apply it to your intranet.
Okay, great. Rob is asking, the struggle we have is balancing engagement. We want people to comment, but also fear of too many email alerts. People get emails when someone comments on a post. I think this also prevents people from leaving a comment. Is there a post type that would allow everyone to be alerted but not notified with each comment within that post?
Yes, that's a great question. It's very timely there for us, actually, because I know from for ThoughtFarmer, we're actively looking at notifications right now and looking into options to minimize or be smarter with notifications to make sure that we're only delivering relevant notifications for comments, so that people will not feel overwhelmed, and when they do get notifications, they'll be highly relevant for them. So stay tuned, we're working on it.
Okay, Jackie is asking, not sure if you mentioned how many total categories of posts did you find?
That's a good question. I think I tried to keep it down to something reasonable, but I believe it was around 20 to 25.
Okay, I'm just trying to sort through all these questions. Barbara's asking, can you brand your intranet too much using colors and icons instead of real pictures, moving pieces, etc.?
It's really up to you in terms of branding, whether you want to use a heavy photo-based brand or something that's more uses image, icons or typography. So in terms of what's the best for your organization, I think ultimately it's like we usually try to when we were working with customers on branding their intranet, we look to their main corporate brand, but we also look to their culture as well too, and try to use something that makes sense for something internally. So it's really up to the organization what their brand requirements are.
Okay, thank you. Jackie is asking, did you take a look at the categories of content that had higher total views versus unique views? For example, content or posts that people seem to come back to again and again?
Yeah, that is something there that I off the top of my head, I don't have the answer to that, but that would be an interesting thing to investigate. As I started kind of poking around here in this data, I started imagining a whole bunch of new scenarios and kept on coming back to it, but I did not get a chance to look into that one.
Okay, and Donna is asking, is 10% of readership on a homepage for stories high?
So that's a good question in terms of benchmarking. How do we compare to other organizations versus how do we compare to ourselves? One of the things here, I mean, you can take a look at, you can see there's a broad range of usage here in terms of organizations, which ones are seeing really high volumes and which ones are seeing low. And one of the things that we usually recommend to organizations, and when it comes to, comparing to other markets, to other company sizes, that's something that's useful and interesting, but we also recommend that people benchmark themselves against their own data. So is 10% high? I guess my question would be, is 10% high for your specific organization? And is that something that's grown? If that's a priority to see that grow over time, then that could be something that as an organization you could work on to say, okay, we want to try to, we're going to baseline against the Q1 of this year. And our goal here is to, drive engagement up by 10% a quarter going forward. So that's something that we can really try to kind of better our best and benchmark against your own organization rather than looking outside. But looking outside is always interesting as well too for things like this.
Okay, I've got another great question here. We have our browsers forced to the home page so that when they log in, it automatically takes them there. That would skew the stats, correct?
In this case, it actually wouldn't, I mean, not directly. So in terms of the actual stats here, I had the query that was run here was just solely looking at blog posts. So that and the homepage is a separate content type, and I'm getting a little bit technical here, from a blog post. And so the views directly onto the homepage were not included in my statistics that I've shared with you here today. Having said that, because would this impact the results? I think it probably would, because now what happens is when every time your employees launch their browser, it's going to take them directly to that homepage. They're going to see content there that's hopefully relevant and interesting and engaging, and they're going to click on it. And then when they click on it, it's now going to show up on my report. So I would go out here and guess that organizations that have that configuration set up would see higher levels of views and engagements than organizations that do not. But the view count of the homepage is not being directly reflected in these figures.
Okay, we probably have time for about one more question here. Was this customer data from organizations with dedicated intranet managers?
Yeah, that was something that, in terms of my like follow-up questions that I'd love to dig into here, would be just to understand the relationship between those types of roles and how and how they perform. I did not have that data here as part of that export to see which organization, the characteristics of the organizations. Only data that I had access to here was the number of employees inside those organizations. But that is a good question here. My suspicion is if you have a dedicated intranet manager, they are probably going to have the time to be able to A, publish more, and B, craft compelling content, which would result in a higher level of engagement and reach.
Okay, thanks. I think that's about all the questions we had today. If you asked a question, I didn't get to it, we will definitely follow up. Yeah, Darren, unless there's anything else that you have to add?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, I think we might have mentioned a few different resources throughout the presentation, in which case we will follow up with a recorded link of the webinar and any articles that we may have mentioned or that can help you with your intranet journey. But otherwise, thank you for attending and have a great afternoon. Bye.
Bye.